A midday sun beats down on an Atlanta park. Two men sit on a bench, eyes locked on a cartel courier carrying $3 million in dirty cash. They are federal agents, minutes away from the biggest bust of their careers. But the man who is about to ruin it all, draw his weapon, and humiliate them in broad daylight isn't a cartel hitman. It's a local patrol cop with a badge, a fragile ego, and a dangerous prejudice. And he has absolutely no idea he just walked into a federal trap. The heat radiating off the concrete of Centennial Olympic Park in downtown Atlanta was the kind that suffocated you the moment you stepped out of air conditioning. It was a blistering Tuesday afternoon in mid-August. The park was sparsely populated, dotted with tourists seeking refuge under the scattered oak trees, and business people rushing back to their high-rises with iced coffees. On a weathered green iron bench near the Fountain of Rings sat two men who, to the untrained eye, looked entirely unremarkable. Special Agent Jonathan Paul leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. At 42, Jonathan was a seasoned veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Organized Crime Task Force. He wore a faded, slightly oversized gray hoodie over a plain white t-shirt and scuffed denim jeans, a deliberate choice to conceal the Kevlar vest and the Glock 19 resting against his hip. Beside him sat Special Agent Samuel Hayes. Sam was younger, 31, a former Army Ranger with a sharp, analytical mind that had fast-tracked him through Quantico. Sam was dressed similarly in an unbuttoned flannel shirt, dark jeans, and construction boots. Both men were black. In the eyes of the neighborhood they were currently surveilling, they looked like two working-class guys taking a break. In reality, they were the linchpins of Operation Glasshouse, a 2-year federal investigation aiming to dismantle the supply chain of the Navarro Syndicate, a brutal cartel operating out of the southeast. "Com check," Jonathan muttered, his lips barely moving. To anyone walking by, it looked like he was chewing gum. "Read you loud and clear, Paul," came the crisp voice of Supervisory Special Agent Richard Cole through the flesh-colored earpiece deeply embedded in Jonathan's right ear. Cole was sitting in a mobile command center, a disguised delivery van parked 3 blocks away, staring at a bank of monitors. "Target is 3 blocks north, approaching on foot. He has the briefcase." "Copy," Sam whispered, adjusting his sunglasses. "We have eyes on the drop zone." The target was Arthur Penhaligon, a notoriously slippery money launderer known in the underworld as the Ghost. Penhaligon was scheduled to hand off a ledger and a digital hard wallet containing access to over $3 million in laundered cartel funds to a mid-level distributor. If Jonathan and Sam could intercept the handoff, they would have the smoking gun needed to secure federal indictments for 22 high-ranking cartel members. The stakes were astronomical. Months of sleepless nights, undercover buys, and dangerous wiretaps all came down to this park bench. While Jonathan and Sam were locked into their mission, another element was entering the chessboard, one completely unaccounted for by the FBI Command Center. Cruising slowly down Andrew Young International Boulevard was a marked Atlanta Police Department squad car. Behind the wheel sat Officer Brian Jenkins. Jenkins was a 10-year veteran of the force, a man whose personnel file was as thick as a phone book, littered with excessive force complaints, racial profiling accusations, and internal affairs investigations. He had survived termination multiple times thanks to a powerful union representative and technicalities, but he had been relegated to low-priority daytime park patrols as a quiet punishment. Jenkins was bitter. He hated the heat, he hated his assignment, and most of all, he hated feeling disrespected. As he drove his cruiser past the perimeter of the park, his eyes scanned the landscape, looking for someone to project his frustration onto. His gaze locked onto the green iron bench near the fountains. He saw Jonathan and Sam. 2 black men in hoodies and flannel on an 85-degree day, sitting perfectly still, staring intently toward the pedestrian walkways. Jenkins didn't see 2 federal agents executing a highly coordinated sting operation. He saw an excuse. He saw 2 thugs who didn't belong in his patrol sector. His prejudiced mind instantly drafted a narrative. They were dealing drugs, casing a tourist to mug, or looking for trouble. Without calling it into his precinct dispatch, Jenkins sharply turned the steering wheel, hopping the curb slightly as he parked his cruiser aggressively on the pedestrian walkway, blocking the entrance to the fountain area. "Look at these 2, Jenkins muttered to himself, turning off the ignition and unclipping the retention strap on his duty holster, a habit he used to intimidate people from the moment he stepped out of his car. He slammed the car door shut, the metallic thud echoing across the quiet park. Back on the bench, Sam's peripheral vision caught the flashing light bar of the cruiser reflecting off the water of the fountain. "Dave," Sam whispered, keeping his head perfectly still. "We have a local, 3 o'clock, and he's making a beeline right for us." Jonathan cursed softly under his breath. "Cole, you got eyes on this APD cruiser?" "I see him on the traffic cams," Cole replied, his voice tense. "He's not responding to our local liaison. He's gone rogue. Do not blow your cover. Penhaligon is less than 60 seconds away. Play it cool, brush the cop off. We cannot lose this drop." "Easier said than done," Jonathan muttered, watching out of the corner of his eye as Jenkins strutted towards them, his hand resting arrogantly on his gun belt, his chest puffed out, seeking a confrontation. Officer Jenkins stopped about 10 feet from the bench, planting his boots wide. He adjusted his aviator sunglasses and stared down at Jonathan and Sam with a look of absolute contempt. "Park's closed for maintenance in this section," Jenkins barked, his voice dripping with unearned authority. It was a blatant lie. A family of 4 was literally feeding pigeons 50 yards away, and a jogger had just passed behind the bench. Jonathan leaned back slightly, adopting a relaxed, non-threatening posture. He knew how to play this game. He had dealt with cops like Jenkins before he ever earned his FBI shield. "Just taking a load off, officer," Jonathan said calmly, his voice smooth and respectful. "It's hot out here. We're just catching some shade. We'll be out of your hair in 5 minutes." Sam kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, pretending to watch the water fountain. In reality, he was scanning the northern entrance of the park. There, a tall, gaunt white man in a sharp grey suit carrying a brushed steel briefcase. Arthur Penhaligon. The target had arrived. "Target is on sight," Cole's voice cracked urgently in their ears. "He's approaching the drop zone. Do not engage the officer. Maintain surveillance." Jenkins didn't like Jonathan's calm demeanor. It didn't feed his ego. He stepped closer, invading their personal space, the smell of cheap cologne and stale coffee radiating off him. "I didn't ask if you were catching shade," Jenkins snapped, his hand tightening on his belt. "I told you to move. What are you 2 doing out here anyway? Dressed like it's winter in the middle of August. You looking to score? You casing somebody?" "No, sir," Sam said, finally turning his head just enough to acknowledge the cop, while keeping Penhaligon in his peripheral vision. "Just waiting for a friend. Like my buddy said, we'll be gone in a few." "Stand up," Jenkins ordered. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Penhaligon had just sat down at a cafe table 50 yards away, placing the briefcase on the ground between his feet. The cartel contact, a heavy-set man in a polo shirt, was approaching him. The transaction was about to happen. "Officer," Jonathan said, dropping his voice a register, shifting from civilian deference to a more authoritative level tone. "We aren't doing anything wrong. We are sitting on a public bench. I strongly suggest you go check on that family over there, or continue your patrol. We are busy." It was the wrong thing to say to a man like Jenkins. The phrase, I strongly suggest, hit Jenkins' fragile ego like a battering ram. His face flushed red beneath his sunglasses. "Oh, you strongly suggest?" Jenkins sneered. He unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 41. I need a secondary unit at the Olympic Park fountains. Got 2 non-compliant suspects refusing to vacate. Possible narcotics activity." "Unit 41, copy. Secondary unit is en route," the dispatcher replied. "Paul! Hayes!" Cole shouted through the earpiece. "The handoff is happening! Look at Penhaligon!" Jonathan and Sam turned their eyes to the cafe. The heavy-set cartel contact had sat down. He was sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Let me see some ID," Jenkins demanded, pulling out his notepad. "Both of you, right now. Government names." Jonathan and Sam were carrying alias identification. Jonathan was currently Marcus Johnson, and Sam was Terence Wright. But handing over the IDs meant breaking eye contact with the target, digging into their pockets, and engaging in a prolonged traffic stop-style interrogation with a cop who was clearly looking to make an arrest. If they broke cover and pulled their federal badges, Penhaligon would see the commotion, realize the park was hot, and run. "We don't have our IDs on us, man," Sam lied smoothly, trying to buy time. "Left our wallets in the truck. It's parked over by the CNN Center." "Is that right?" Jenkins smirked, stepping within arm's reach. He loved this part, the part where he felt total control. "No ID, refusing a lawful order, suspicious behavior. You boys are about 10 seconds away from eating concrete. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." "Officer Jenkins," Jonathan said, reading the man's name tag. He locked eyes with the cop, dropping all pretense of the street persona. His gaze was cold, piercing, and carried the weight of the federal government. "You are interfering with something much larger than you can understand right now. Walk back to your cruiser. Now." Jenkins froze for a fraction of a second, unsettled by the sudden shift in Jonathan's demeanor. This wasn't the fearful or angry reaction he was used to getting. This was a command. But Jenkins's arrogance quickly overrode his instincts. "Are you threatening a police officer, boy?" Jenkins hissed, his hand dropping away from his pepper spray and moving directly to his taser. "Target is making the exchange. Paul, you have to move in. Go, go, go!" Cole yelled in their ears. Jonathan and Sam had no choice. They had to execute the arrest on Penhaligon before he left the park with the cartel funds. "We're moving," Jonathan said to Sam. Both agents stood up simultaneously, their eyes fixed on the cafe table 50 yards away, completely ignoring Jenkins. "I said hands behind your back!" Jenkins roared, entirely misinterpreting their movement. In his mind, they were either trying to flee or attack him. Before Jonathan could take a step toward Penhaligon, Jenkins lunged. Jenkins grabbed Jonathan by the shoulder of his hoodie and violently yanked him backward. Jonathan, caught off guard and focused entirely on the cartel target, stumbled against the heavy iron armrest of the bench. "Back off!" Sam shouted, pivoting to intervene, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "You're making a mistake. Assaulting an officer. Resisting arrest!" Jenkins screamed, spiraling into a panic of his own making. He pulled his taser and jammed it directly into Sam's chest. "Get on the ground or you ride the lightning. Down!" At the cafe table, the heavy-set cartel contact heard the shouting. He looked over, saw a police officer grappling with 2 men, and instantly recognized the chaotic signs of a bust. He grabbed the briefcase, shoved the envelope back at Penhaligon, and took off sprinting toward the street. Penhaligon didn't hesitate. He bolted in the opposite direction, melting into the crowd of tourists. "No!" Jonathan yelled, watching 2 years of undercover work evaporate in front of his eyes. "Cole, target is rabbiting. North exit, grey suit. We see him. Units are too far out. He's getting into a cab. Damn it, Paul, we lost the money." Cole's voice was furious, echoing painfully in Jonathan's earpiece. The realization that the operation was dead washed over Jonathan like ice water. The cartel money was gone. The ledger was gone. And it was all because of a racist beat cop who couldn't leave well enough alone. A cold, dark fury settled in Jonathan's chest. "On the ground!" Jenkins screamed again, spit flying from his lips as he shoved Sam hard against the back of the bench. "Take it easy. We're complying." Sam gritted his teeth, allowing Jenkins to force him chest first against the hot iron slats of the bench. Sam knew better than to fight a uniformed officer, even if the officer was dead wrong. Survival came first. The truth would come out in about 2 minutes. Jenkins violently wrenched Sam's arms behind his back, the steel handcuffs biting viciously into Sam's wrists as Jenkins ratcheted them far tighter than legally allowed. Jonathan stood still, his hands raised in the air, his eyes burning holes into Jenkins. "Your turn," Jenkins sneered, breathing heavily, high on adrenaline. He holstered his taser and drew his secondary pair of cuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back. Give me a reason to drop you. Come on." "Officer Jenkins," Jonathan said, his voice terrifyingly calm, devoid of any fear. "You just cost the United States government $3 million. You just let a cartel money launderer escape. My name is Special Agent Jonathan Paul. The man you just assaulted is Special Agent Samuel Hayes. We are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Jenkins paused. For a second, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. But then he looked at Jonathan's baggy clothes, his worn-out shoes, and his skin color. The prejudice ran too deep. He couldn't compute the reality in front of him. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "FBI? Yeah, right. And I'm the President of the United States," Jenkins scoffed, stepping forward and violently spinning Jonathan around. He kicked Jonathan's legs apart, almost hyperextending his knee, and slammed his chest against the bench next to Sam. Jenkins slapped the cuffs on Jonathan, locking them tightly. "You guys are pathetic," Jenkins gloated, patting down Jonathan's sides. "Impersonating a federal officer? That's a felony, boys. Let's see what you've really got on you." Jenkins reached his hand under Jonathan's hoodie, expecting to find a baggie of crack cocaine or an illegal, unregistered handgun. Instead, his hand brushed against a molded Kydex holster holding a perfectly maintained Glock 19. Next to it, clipped securely to a reinforced tactical belt, was a heavy, leather credential case. Jenkins's smirk faltered. He pulled the leather case out from under the hoodie. Flipping it open, the harsh midday sun hit the polished metal inside. A solid gold shield with the blue enamel seal of the Department of Justice. Next to it, a laminated ID card bearing Jonathan's photo, the FBI watermark, and the signature of the director. The park around them seemed to go dead silent. The only sound was the splashing of the fountain and the erratic, suddenly shallow breathing of Officer Brian Jenkins. Jenkins stared at the gold badge. He blinked. He looked at the badge, then looked down at the 2 men in handcuffs. Fake," Jenkins stammered, though his voice had lost all its bravado. His hands began to tremble. "This is... You bought this online. Good fake, though. Check my left breast pocket, Brian," Sam said from the bench, his cheek pressed against the hot iron, his voice dripping with pure venom. "Go ahead. Let's see how many fake federal credentials you can find today." Jenkins swallowed hard, sweat suddenly pouring down his forehead, stinging his eyes. With shaking hands, he reached into Sam's shirt pocket and pulled out a second leather case. Another gold badge. Another federal ID. Right at that moment, the wail of police sirens pierced the air. But they weren't the standard 2-tone sirens of the Atlanta PD backup Jenkins had called for. 3 matte black SUVs with hidden red and blue strobe lights screeching through the park's pedestrian walkways, tearing up the grass as they surrounded Jenkins' patrol car. The doors of the SUVs flew open. Out poured a dozen heavily armed tactical agents, wearing olive-drab tactical vests with massive yellow letters across their chests. FBI. Supervisory Agent Richard Cole stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a large, imposing man, wearing a sharp suit with his badge clipped to his belt and an expression that promised absolute destruction. He bypassed Jenkins entirely and walked straight to the bench. "Agent Paul, Agent Hayes, are you injured?" Cole asked, his voice cutting through the humid air like a razor blade. "Just our pride, boss," Jonathan said calmly, looking over his shoulder at the paralyzed police officer. "And our wrists. Officer Jenkins here has a heavy hand." Cole slowly turned his gaze to Jenkins. Jenkins was frozen in place, holding 2 FBI badges in his trembling hands, staring at the dozen federal agents who now had their hands resting on their sidearms, watching him with murderous intent. The karma was just getting started. Supervisory Special Agent Richard Cole did not yell. He didn't have to. The terrifying, quiet authority radiating from him was enough to suck the remaining oxygen out of the humid Atlanta air. He stepped right into Officer Brian Jenkins' personal space, staring down at the trembling cop. "The keys," Cole demanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Now." Jenkins, his face entirely drained of its former arrogant flush, fumbled blindly at his heavy duty belt. His fingers, suddenly devoid of fine motor skills, slipped over the metal clasp twice before he managed to unhook his keyring. He handed them over to Cole like a terrified child handing a switch to a disciplinarian. Cole didn't even look at him. He tossed the keys to another tactical agent who swiftly stepped around the bench, unlocking the handcuffs biting into Jonathan's wrists, then Sam's. Jonathan rolled his shoulders, massaging the deep, angry red indentations pressed into his skin. He stood up slowly, picking up his fallen gold shield from the concrete. He dusted it off and clipped it securely to his belt. Sam did the same, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his face ticked. "Listen, I didn't know," Jenkins stammered, his eyes darting between the dozen federal weapons casually resting in the hands of the tactical team. He took a nervous step back until his hips hit his cruiser. "They weren't wearing ID. They were loitering. It was a standard Terry stop. Suspicious behavior in a high-crime transient area. I was doing my job." "Your job?" Jonathan stepped forward. The calm, deferential man from 5 minutes ago was gone. In his place was a furious federal investigator. "Your job is to run a standard patrol, call in your stops to dispatch, and uphold the Constitution. You didn't run our descriptions. You didn't notify dispatch until you'd already initiated the confrontation. You bypassed 3 other groups of people violating park ordinances to target us. And when I told you to back off, you assaulted my partner. I had probable cause," Jenkins squeaked, though his voice cracked humiliatingly. "You had prejudice," Sam corrected, stepping up beside Jonathan. "And because of your fragile, racist ego, a primary target in a multi-agency RICO investigation just walked away with $3 million of Navarro cartel money." Before Jenkins could formulate another pathetic defense, the wail of Atlanta Police Department sirens finally reached a crescendo. 2 APD cruisers skidded to a halt on the grass, boxing in the FBI vehicles. 4 uniformed officers jumped out, hands on their holsters, anticipating a shootout with armed suspects. Instead, they found a wall of heavily armed federal agents surrounding one of their own, Sergeant Thomas Griggs, a gray-haired APD veteran and Jenkins's shift supervisor, pushed his way to the front. He looked at the FBI tactical vests, the unmarked SUVs, and finally at Jenkins, who looked like he was about to vomit on his own boots. "What in the hell is going on here?" Sergeant Griggs demanded, looking at Cole. "Who's in charge? Why is my officer surrounded?" "I am," Cole said, flashing his credentials. "Supervisory Special Agent Cole, FBI Organized Crime Task Force." "And your officer isn't surrounded, Sergeant. He's in federal custody." Griggs blinked, completely taken aback. Custody? For what? Now hold on, Agent Cole. Let's not get hot-headed. If my guy overstepped on a stop, we handle that internally. Professional courtesy. We'll write him up, send it to Internal Affairs. You don't need to make a scene. Professional courtesy, Jonathan repeated, a harsh, bitter laugh escaping his lips. He walked right up to Sergeant Griggs, pointing a finger at Jenkins. Your guy didn't overstep. He blew a 2-year federal wiretap operation. He physically assaulted 2 on-duty federal agents. He deprived us of our civil rights under color of law. That's Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. And assaulting a federal officer, that's Section 111. Both are federal felonies. So no, Sergeant. Internal Affairs doesn't get this one. We do. Griggs looked at Jenkins, his expression shifting from defensive to disgusted. Jesus Christ, Brad. What did you do? They looked like gangbangers, Sarge, Jenkins pleaded, a desperate whine in his voice. Look at how they're dressed. They were casing the park. I was being proactive. Disarm him, Cole ordered smoothly. 2 FBI tactical agents stepped forward. Wait, Sarge! Jenkins panicked, looking to his supervisor for salvation. You can't let them do this. I'm a local cop. Sergeant Griggs looked at the furious federal agents, then at the red welts on Jonathan and Sam's wrists. He slowly raised his hands and took a step back, abandoning Jenkins entirely. You're on your own, Brad. I'm not catching a federal obstruction charge for your stupid mistakes. The absolute terror in Jenkins's eyes was a picture of perfect karma. The man who thrived on stripping citizens of their dignity, who used his badge as a weapon of humiliation, was now on the receiving end. Agent Paul, Cole said, nodding to Jonathan. Do the honors. Jonathan walked up to Jenkins. Jenkins flinched, expecting to be shoved or struck. Instead, Jonathan reached out with cold, clinical precision. He unsnapped the retention strap on Jenkins's holster and pulled the APD-issued Glock 22 from the cop's hip, handing it to a tactical agent. Then, Jonathan unclipped Jenkins's radio, his taser, and his spare magazines. Finally, he unbuckled the heavy leather duty belt entirely, letting it drop to the concrete with a heavy thud. Jenkins was left standing there in his sweat-soaked uniform, completely stripped of the tools he used to terrorize his precinct. He looked small, weak. Turn around, Jonathan said softly. Please, Jenkins whispered, a tear of sheer humiliation breaking loose and tracking through the sweat on his cheek. I'll quit. I'll hand in my badge today. Just don't put the cuffs on me in front of everyone. Jonathan leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper, meant only for Jenkins. Think about how many innocent kids you've said those exact words to. Think about how many lives you ruined because you didn't like the way someone looked. You didn't care about their dignity. I don't care about yours. Jonathan grabbed Jenkins by the shoulder, spun him around, and slammed the heavy federal steel handcuffs onto Jenkins' wrists. He ratcheted them tight, not enough to cause permanent injury, but enough for Jenkins to feel the inescapable grip of federal justice. Brian Jenkins, you are under arrest for assault on a federal officer and deprivation of rights under color of law, Jonathan recited, his voice echoing across the park for the gathered crowd of tourists and APD officers to hear. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it. Jonathan and Sam grabbed Jenkins by the biceps and frog-marched him past the silent APD officers, shoving his head down as they threw him into the back of the black FBI SUV. As the doors slammed shut, sealing Jenkins in the dark, the real nightmare was only just beginning. The holding cell at the Atlanta FBI field office was intentionally designed to be psychologically crushing. It was entirely gray, freezing cold, and stripped of any identifying features. There were no windows, no clocks, just a steel table bolted to the floor and a heavy steel ring on the wall. Brian Jenkins sat shivering in an orange Bureau of Prisons jumpsuit, his APD uniform having been seized as evidence. He had been sitting in the freezing room for 6 hours. No water, no phone call. Every time he asked for his union representative, Frank Hodges, the federal guards just stared at him blankly and closed the heavy steel door. Jenkins was slowly spiraling. In his mind, he was trying to calculate his odds. It was a mistake, he kept telling himself. A misunderstanding. A good lawyer will plea it down to a misdemeanor. I'll lose my pension, sure, but I won't do hard time. He was relying on the thin blue line, the historical precedent of cops getting away with bad behavior. He had no idea how deep the hole he dug actually was. The heavy door clicked and swung open. Agents Jonathan Paul and Samuel Hayes walked in. They had showered and changed into sharp, immaculately tailored dark suits. They looked like the apex predators of the justice system. Behind them walked a tall, severe-looking man holding a thick manila folder. Assistant United States Attorney Robert Kavanaugh. The three men sat down across from Jenkins. The silence stretched for a full minute. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably, the steel handcuffs clinking against the table ring he was tethered to. "Where is my union rep?" Jenkins demanded, trying to summon a fraction of his former bravado. "I know my Garrity rights. I ain't saying a damn word until Frank Hodges gets in here." A USA Kavanaugh opened the folder, his face devoid of any emotion. "Mr. Hodges was turned away at the lobby 3 hours ago, Mr. Jenkins. He handles administrative disciplinary hearings for the Atlanta Police Department. You are currently facing a federal grand jury indictment. Your union cannot help you here." Jenkins swallowed hard. "I want a lawyer." "You'll get a public defender assigned at your arraignment tomorrow morning," Kavanaugh replied smoothly. "But before we officially book you into the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta for pre-trial holding, Agents Paul and Hayes wanted to show you what our evidence response team found." "Found?" Jenkins frowned, his heart rate suddenly spiking. "Found where?" Jonathan leaned forward, intertwining his fingers on the metal table. "While you were sitting in here shivering, Brian, our tech team executed a federal search warrant on your APD cruiser. Now, standard protocol for a bad stop usually involves pulling the dash cam and body cam footage to prove civil rights violations. We did that. It's damning. You didn't have your lights on, you didn't run our descriptions, and you texted another officer on your personal phone 3 minutes before approaching us." Sam slid an 8x10 glossy photograph across the table. It was a screenshot of a text message thread. Jenkins. "Got 2 thugs casing the Olympic Park. Officer Vance. You call it in?" Jenkins. "Nah. Gonna go shake 'em down. They look like they holding." Jenkins closed his eyes. The text message destroyed any defense of proactive policing. It proved premeditated harassment. But Jonathan wasn't done. "That text message gets you 5 years in federal prison," Jonathan said softly. "But that's not why we're here. Because when our dogs swept your cruiser, they didn't just find your patrol bag. They alerted on the trunk." Jenkins's face went from pale to a sickly, chalky white. The air completely left his lungs. Sam slid 3 more photographs across the table. The first showed the trunk of Jenkins' APD cruiser, with the spare tire removed. The second showed a false floor pan welded beneath the tire well. The third showed what was inside, a black duffel bag containing 4 unserialized Glock handguns, 50 bundles of heroin wrapped in electrical tape, and a vacuum-sealed brick of $100 bills totaling nearly $80,000. "We pulled your GPS logs for the last 18 months, a USA Kavanaugh stated, his voice clinical and lethal. They perfectly match the dates and locations of 12 unsolved stash house robberies in APD Zone 5. Robberies where the dealers claimed the assailants wore police tactical gear and used APD-issued flashbangs. You weren't coming over to us because you thought we were casing the park, Sam realized aloud, leaning back in his chair, looking at Jenkins with pure disgust. You saw two black men you assumed were street-level dealers. You thought we had cash on us. You didn't call dispatch because you wanted to steal our money, beat us down, and throw us in the system, knowing nobody would believe a couple of thugs over a decorated APD officer. It's not what it looks like, Jenkins whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely speak. The reality of his situation had just crushed him. He wasn't just a racist cop who made a bad stop anymore. He was a corrupt officer running a robbery crew. It looks exactly like what it is, Jonathan said, his voice hard as iron. A corrupt, prejudiced coward who used his badge as a license to rob and abuse the citizens he swore to protect. You thought you were preying on the weak today, Brian. But you walked into the middle of an active FBI RICO investigation, and you exposed yourself. Kavanaugh closed the folder with a sharp snap. Possession of narcotics with intent to distribute. Possession of unserialized firearms, armed robbery, deprivation of rights under color of law, assault on a federal officer. Kavanaugh listed, looking Jenkins dead in the eye. And since you derailed a federal cartel sting, I am invoking the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act against you. You are looking at a mandatory minimum of 45 years in federal prison. There is no parole in the federal system. You will die in a concrete box. Jenkins began to hyperventilate. Tears streamed down his face, dropping onto the steel table. Please, I can help you. I know guys in the department. I know who's moving the drugs in Zone 5. I can give you names. I can give you my captain. Oh, we already have your captain, Sam said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. The DOJ Civil Rights Division just raided your precinct 20 minutes ago. The FBI is taking over APD Zone 5. Your little gang is finished. Jonathan stood up, looking down at the broken, sobbing man tethered to the table. There was no pity in his eyes, only the cold, satisfying finality of a predator being caught in its own trap. Enjoy the pen, Brian, Jonathan said softly. I hear former cops are real popular in federal lockup. The three men turned and walked out of the interrogation room. The heavy steel door slammed shut, the heavy deadbolt sliding into place with a definitive clack, leaving Brian Jenkins alone in the dark, with nothing but the ghosts of the people he had wronged, and the crushing weight of his inescapable karma. While Brian Jenkins sat weeping in a freezing federal interrogation room, a completely different kind of storm was making landfall 3 miles away at the Atlanta Police Department, Zone 5 precinct. Captain Thomas Harrison sat behind his heavy oak desk, loosening his tie and sipping a lukewarm coffee. It was 4:15 p.m. The shift change was approaching, and the precinct was humming, with the usual chaotic energy of booking, processing, ringing phones, and loud banter. Harrison was a 30-year veteran who treated his precinct less like a public service building and more like a feudal kingdom. He knew about the skimming. He knew about the excessive force. He actively covered for officers who handled things in-house. As long as crime statistics looked decent on paper for the mayor's office, Harrison turned a blind eye to the rot spreading through his ranks. He didn't hear the tactical boots hitting the pavement outside. The heavy glass double doors of the precinct were violently thrown open, shattering the afternoon lull. 50 heavily armed federal agents wearing dark tactical gear and windbreakers emblazoned with FBI and DOJ civil rights poured into the lobby. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision. Federal agents, secure your weapons. Step away from your desks. Nobody touches a computer. A voice boomed over a portable bullhorn. Officers in the bullpen froze, their hands hovering over keyboards and holsters. The sheer, overwhelming force of the federal raid paralyzed them. 2 tactical agents immediately flanked the armory, slapping a heavy federal padlock onto the reinforced door. 3 more agents stormed the server room, immediately pulling the power cables and securing the precinct's internal hard drives into anti-static evidence bags. Upstairs, the door to Captain Harrison's office didn't just open, it was kicked off its hinges. Supervisory Special Agent Richard Cole stepped through the splintered doorway, flanked by 2 agents carrying heavy breaching shotguns. Cole didn't blink. He walked straight to Harrison's desk and slammed a 50-page federal search warrant down on the wood. "Captain Harrison, you are relieved of your command," Cole said, his voice cold and flat. "Step away from the desk and keep your hands where I can see them." Harrison stood up, his face flushed purple with outrage. "What the hell is the meaning of this? You can't just storm a city police precinct. I'll have the mayor and the police commissioner on the phone in 2 minutes. You're out of your jurisdiction." The Department of Justice has authorized a complete takeover of Zone 5 under the federal racketeering statute, Cole replied, stepping closer until he was inches from the captain. "And you aren't calling anyone. We have sworn testimony, GPS, tracking data, and physical evidence that a robbery ring is being operated out of this building using city resources. 5 of your officers are currently being handcuffed in the bullpen. Your patrol commander is being pulled over on Interstate 75 as we speak." Harrison's bravado completely evaporated. "Robbery ring, who? Who gave you this?" "Officer Brian Jenkins," Cole said smoothly, watching the blood drain from the captain's face. "He had a very talkative afternoon. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, Thomas. You're going to federal holding." As the precinct was systematically dismantled, Jonathan Paul and Samuel Hayes were back at the FBI field office, sitting in a secure evidence processing room. The chaos of the botched sting at Centennial Olympic Park still stung, but the adrenaline of Jenkins's arrest had sharpened their focus. Spread out across a massive aluminum table were the contents of the hidden compartment in Jenkins' patrol car. The brick of cash, the heroin, the unregistered Glocks, and, most importantly, a small black moleskin notebook Jenkins had kept meticulously updated. "I can't believe this guy," Sam muttered, wearing blue latex gloves as he carefully turned the pages of the notebook. He actually kept a ledger of his own crimes, dates, addresses, estimated cash seized. It's like a how to go to prison for dummies guidebook. Jonathan was staring at a digital map projected onto a large monitor, cross-referencing the addresses from Jenkins' notebook with the FBI's existing surveillance files on the Navarro cartel. He typed furiously on his keyboard, pulling up utility records and property deeds. Suddenly, Jonathan stopped. He leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes widening. "Sam," Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Read off the address for the stash house Jenkins and his crew robbed on June 12th. Sam flipped back a few pages. 1440 Highland Avenue, apartment 4B. Why?" Jonathan typed the address into the cartel database. A glowing red pin dropped onto the map, directly overlapping with a known cartel subsidiary front. "Now read the one from July 2nd. 899 Ponce de Leon. The old auto body shop," Sam read, standing up and walking over to the monitor. Jonathan hit enter. Another red pin dropped. A perfect match for a Navarro syndicate drop point. Jenkins wasn't just shaking down local street dealers. Jonathan breathed, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He thought he was hitting low-level gangs. But these addresses, they match the Navarro cartel's distribution nodes. Jenkins and his corrupt cops were blindly robbing the most dangerous drug cartel in the southeast. Sam stared at the screen, the pieces rapidly falling into place. And they didn't get killed because they were hitting the locations in full APD tactical gear. The cartel thought they were getting legitimately raided by local law enforcement, so they didn't shoot back. They just took the loss and moved locations. Exactly, Jonathan said, his heart pounding. Jenkins ruined our sting today, but because he was so greedy, he kept a record of every location he surveilled. Look at the last entry in the notebook. Dated yesterday. Sam looked down at the open page. Target 14, 200 Industrial Boulevard. Warehouse 9. Heavy foot traffic. Smell of bleach. Moving in tonight. Jonathan grabbed his encrypted radio. Cole, this is Paul. I need you back at the field office right now. Operation Glasshouse isn't dead. What are you talking about, Dave? Penhaligon rabbiting cost us the ledger and the money. Cole's voice crackled back over the radio, heavy with the exhaustion of the precinct raid. Penhaligon is a money man. He doesn't hold the physical product, Jonathan said quickly. Jenkins just unknowingly handed us the address to the cartel's primary holding warehouse for the entire city, and according to his notes, Jenkins and his rogue crew were planning to rob it tonight. If we hit it first, we don't just get the $3 million Penhaligon walked away with, we get the whole damn bank. Less than 3 hours later, the night sky over Atlanta was shattered by the rhythmic thumping of 2 FBI Black Hawk helicopters. Below, a convoy of heavily armored Bearcat vehicles tore through the industrial district. Jonathan and Sam sat in the lead vehicle, clad in heavy tactical gear, night vision goggles resting on their helmets. The failure of the afternoon had been entirely eclipsed by the opportunity of the night. They hit Warehouse 9 with the force of a hurricane. Flashbangs lit up the dark, cavernous space like localized lightning strikes. The cartel guards inside, expecting a quiet night, were completely overwhelmed by the sheer, staggering volume of federal firepower. In less than 4 minutes, the building was secure without a single casualty. When Jonathan and Sam cracked open the heavy steel shipping container sitting in the center of the warehouse, they didn't just find the $3 million in dirty cash Penhaligon had been moving. They found $20 million, shrink-wrapped on wooden pallets, alongside the cartel's master physical ledger and 400 kilos of uncut fentanyl. It was the largest single drug and currency seizure in the history of the southeastern United States, and ironically, it was all made possible by a racist beat cop who couldn't resist harassing 2 innocent-looking men on a park bench. 4 months later, the crisp autumn chill had finally broken the sweltering Atlanta heat. Inside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building, Courtroom 4B was packed to absolute capacity. The heavy mahogany walls and thick carpet absorbed the murmurs of the reporters, federal agents, and civilian onlookers who had crammed into the wooden pews. At the defense table sat Brian Jenkins. He was unrecognizable from the arrogant, puffed-up patrol officer who had strutted through Centennial Olympic Park in his aviator sunglasses. He had lost 30 pounds. His skin was sallow, his hair thinning and grey. He wore an oversized, drab olive federal inmate jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles bound in heavy transport chains that rattled every time he shifted his weight. Jenkins stared blankly at the polished wood of the table. He had pled guilty. There was no trial. The mountain of evidence, the text messages, the dash cam footage, the ledger, the drugs in his trunk, and the flipped testimony of his former precinct captain made fighting the charges a mathematical impossibility. He had taken a plea deal just to take the death penalty and consecutive life sentences off the table, but he knew his life was effectively over. Sitting in the front row of the gallery behind the prosecution were Special Agents Jonathan Paul and Samuel Hayes. They wore sharp, tailored suits, their federal shields clipped to their belts. They watched Jenkins not with anger, but with the cold, clinical detachment of men who had successfully removed a parasite from the system. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed as the heavy door behind the bench swung open. Judge Robert Kensington, a notoriously stern federal judge with zero tolerance for corruption, took his seat. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the massive stack of sentencing documents. "Be seated," Judge Kensington commanded. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He looked directly at Jenkins. "Mr. Jenkins, stand up." Jenkins slowly rose, the chains clinking loudly in the dead, silent courtroom. His defense attorney, a weary-looking public defender, stood beside him. "I have spent the last 3 days reading the presentence investigation report," Judge Kensington began, his voice echoing powerfully through the room. "I have read the victim impact statements from the citizens you unlawfully detained, harassed, and assaulted over your 10-year career. I have read the transcripts of your text messages, where you openly bragged about terrorizing marginalized communities because you knew they lacked the resources to fight back." Jenkins kept his eyes glued to the floor. He couldn't look at the judge. He couldn't look at Jonathan and Sam. "You were given a badge, a gun, and the sacred trust of the public," Kensington continued, his tone dripping with contempt. "You weaponized that trust. You operated a violent criminal enterprise from the front seat of a taxpayer-funded police cruiser. And when confronted by federal agents attempting to dismantle a major cartel operation, your blinding prejudice and fragile ego led you to assault those very agents." Judge Kensington paused, taking off his glasses. "The irony is not lost on this court that your profound ignorance inadvertently handed the FBI the keys to the Navarro cartel's local infrastructure. But that was an accident of your own greed, not a mitigating factor of your character. A police officer who uses his badge to commit crimes is the most dangerous kind of criminal there is. You erode the very foundation of justice. You make the jobs of every honest, hard-working officer infinitely more dangerous." The judge picked up his wooden gavel. "Brian Jenkins, on the charges of deprivation of rights under color of law, assault on a federal officer, armed robbery, and racketeering, I sentence you to a total of 420 months, 35 years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. As these are federal convictions, there is no parole. You are remanded to the Supermax facility in Florence, Colorado, effective immediately." Bang! The sound of the gavel striking the sound block was like a gunshot. Jenkins' knees buckled. His public defender had to grab him by the arm to keep him from collapsing onto the floor. 35 years. No early release. He would be nearly 75 years old by the time he saw the outside world again, if he survived federal prison as a disgraced, corrupt ex-cop. 2 massive U.S. Marshals stepped forward, grabbing Jenkins roughly by the biceps. As they turned him around to march him down the center aisle of the courtroom, Jenkins' hollow, terrified eyes met Jonathan Paul's. Jonathan didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just held the eye contact, a silent, powerful reminder of the park bench. A reminder that true power doesn't come from a badge and a gun used to bully the weak, but from quiet integrity and the inescapable reach of accountability. Jenkins looked away first, sobbing silently, as the marshals dragged him through the heavy wooden doors and out of sight. Outside the courthouse, the crisp autumn air felt incredibly clean. Jonathan and Sam walked down the wide granite steps, unbuttoning their suit jackets. The media circus was waiting at the bottom, but the agents expertly bypassed the flashing cameras, slipping down a side street toward their unmarked government sedan. 35 years, Sam said, exhaling a long breath. "Think he'll make it 5? "Not our problem anymore," Jonathan replied, pulling his car keys from his pocket. He looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling the weight of the last 4 months finally lift off his shoulders. Operation Glasshouse was closed, the Navarro syndicate was crippled, and Zone 5 was under completely new, federally monitored management. "You want to grab a coffee?" Sam asked, opening the passenger door. "I know a place over near Centennial Park. They've got great outdoor seating." Nice benches. Jonathan stopped, looking at his partner. A slow, genuine smile finally broke across his face. Yeah, Jonathan laughed softly, getting into the driver's seat. Just as long as we keep our IDs in our front pockets. They pulled out into the Atlanta traffic, the city moving around them, slightly safer, slightly cleaner, and blissfully unaware of the silent guardians watching over the streets. Power without accountability is just tyranny waiting for an excuse. Brian Jenkins thought his badge made him a predator, completely untouchable to the citizens he swore to protect. But prejudice is a blinding force, and his arrogant assumption about two black men on a park bench didn't just cost him his career. It unraveled his entire corrupt kingdom and triggered a karmic strike he will spend the rest of his life paying for in a concrete cell. If you loved this story of absolute justice and hard-hitting karma, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button to feed the algorithm. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life revenge and karma stories every single week. Drop a comment below. What would you have said to Jenkins in that interrogation room? Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.